And we're live. Welcome to another edition of the Conversation Live. My name is James Farr, and I'm your host this afternoon. And we're going to be talking about some things that deal with social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, equality. And then we also explore this narrative here in Pasadena, California, called the Pasadena Way. Sit back. We're going to let some folks jump in, join the live stream. Make sure that you share this information. I have a pretty good guy coming in a little bit in just a few moments. He's going to be joining us. Very involved in his community, very tech savvy. I've actually learned a lot from him just watching him, but we'll get to him in just a second. Again, my name is James Farr. You're watching the Conversation Live, and we are powered by Pasadena Now. And go over to their page, check out their updates, check out their information. Lots of good things happening in this local community. And so let's go ahead and, this is live. We're still doing some beta testing. So, I was watching CNN this morning and, all the coverage that was happening in Las Vegas. And we cannot, and we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the terrorist act. And I'm just going to call it straight for what it is. It was a terrorist act. And, but, as typically mainstream media will tend to kind of dumb it down and say things like we want to wait to find out what the motives were behind this whole situation. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my guest today. His name is none other than DKing, and he is the creator and founder of Redeeming Times magazine, and he talks a lot about this thing called urban ingenuity. Brother King, are you there with us?
Hey, how you doing, Mr. Farr? I'm here.
Come on, man. That Mr. thing is I'm just James, man. I'll accept big bro. You know what I mean? And I'm getting comfortable with that. I just had a birthday last month, and one of my friends hit me up and said, "Happy birthday, OG." And I said, "OG? Oh, you mean the older guy?" so I'm gonna go ahead and own that, man, and accept that. So how you doing today, Brother King?
Man, I'm well, man. I'm doing really well, man. First of all, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of the conversation. I just, that surfing, that big bro, man, that's admiration. That's really a term of endearment. At least that's my intention.
I receive it, brother. Like I said, it's on me to be comfortable with that and accept this space that God has afforded me to be in, man. And you and I talked last week, and I follow you on social media, and you really have some insightful things. You're probably one of the most well-read brothers I know, very learned. You study, your stuff. I don't see you just speaking kind of out of the side of your neck. But tell my audience, a little bit about your background and how we end up here today.
Okay, thank you so much. So yeah, a little bit about my background. I'm born and raised in the city of Richmond, California. Actually born in San Pablo, Brookside Hospital. If you're born and raised in Richmond, chances are you was born in Brookside Hospital. Later became Doctors Medical, and it's now closed. Growing up in Richmond, very unique childhood. I would say unique only in the sense that it's unique to me. I think a lot of very common experiences when you grow up in poverty and grow up poor. Luckily, I had an incredible mother, single parent household. To make a long story short, by the time I got 11 years old, I was off the porch. I was kind of already tasting the streets a little bit. The first time I actually went to juvenile hall was 11 years old, 1988. Never forget it. And I just think that from there, I just kind of slowly was indoctrinated into a cycle or a system that was obviously, well, I wouldn't say obviously, but I think obviously to people now, especially in today's era with police brutality, and as much as we talk about restorative justice and the need for it, today, just caught up in the cycle of, mass incarceration and delinquency. And eventually went through all the motions, the camps, the juvenile halls, California Youth Authority, where I actually served about 8 years, 8 months, and 4 days. My most formative years, to be exact, from 16 to about 24 years old. And then was only home 9 months after doing almost a 9-year stint before I went to the penitentiary the first time. Went back to the penitentiary after serving about a little over a year, almost 2 years, about, a year, 9 months or so. Did a violation for 6 months, and since that time, never been back. I want to attribute a lot of, and just a little bit, since that time, I've ran for Richmond City Council. I've sat on, various commissions,
I want to get to your service a little bit later, but I think it's important. Okay. When we kind of got to understand where you came from to where you are right now. And, because you kind of went back to when you were 11 years old, kind of off the porch. And, for some in the audience, they may not, kind of understand what that means. That means the leash was kind of cut and you were out there, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Right. Well, I kind of gnawed the leash off. Yeah. It wasn't necessarily cut. And it was just, first off, I think it had to do with me, even how I got to that point. It wasn't that I was in a household where my mom was, on drugs or, I had those things going on around me. This was 1988. Crack epidemic was full speed ahead, especially in the Bay Area. Most of us lived in subsidized housing projects or some form of subsidized housing, and areas or communities that are underserved. And I think when you identify, well, at least for me, when I identify with wants and needs that were kind of rooted into, materialism and individualism. Again, this was 1988. We talking about, Miami Vice and Magnum PI and Ferraris and, cocaine and a very pronounced transition out of like that disco era, but now into that, that very selfish, climate that existed in the 80s to me, where, it was about, celebrity and excess. And I think that even translated to what people was doing with the drug proceeds and stuff like that in the community. So it wasn't a lot of violence and stuff then, but it was a lot of, behavior and a lot of information that definitely influenced me in a negative way. And so I wanted things. And when I say I got off the porch early, I started hanging out, started just wanted to get the lingo, wanted to see what the action was all about. Wasn't really involved in nothing, but more just kind of hanging out on the fringes, watching some of the older brothers in various neighborhoods. Couldn't wait to go spend some time with my big mama, which is my dad's mother, because my dad would kind of pick me up for the weekend, drop me off at my grandmother's house, and then go to work. So, very limited interaction with him, but was still trying to keep me connected with that side of the family. And that was right in the heart of Central Richmond, 5th and Ripley, to be exact, right on the heart. Yeah, right in the heart of Central Richmond. And you got to see, seeing a lot of things, seeing your cousin get shot, promiscuous exploits at a young age, money, definitely seen a lot of money, and then also, there was periods of hindsight. So as you go from 11 to say 13, 14, a lot of understanding develops that allows you to reinterpret things that you've already experienced. And so you kind of get this instant revelation, this instant dose of game, if you will, GAME guidelines, all men must embrace or endure, as it related to that particular social climate, that particular arena that I was in growing up in Richmond, California. So my experience was unique in that sense, but I'm sure South Central, Chicago, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, all across Ohio, Indiana, all across the country, there's a young Black boy or girl who has had a similar story or experience to mine. And And so from there, after spending that amount of time incarcerated in and out of the system, there was definitely a lot of programming that has taken place. Things that I'm just now starting to understand and come to terms with regards to identifying what those things are and how they are still having an impact on my life and has had impact on my life as it relates to even adult decision making today.
Well, when you say some of those situations, kind of give me an example of what are you meaning?
Okay, so like situations in terms of poor decision making today.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So just the anxiety that comes with the necessity at times to be interpersonal, and what those challenges represent for me, and how there's been times where I may have overcompensated either one way that was not beneficial or one way that might have been a little bit over the top, but still, there was maybe some favorable response. So I guess what I mean by that is that I can become very secluded, very isolated, even though even today I'm involved in work and activity that requires, you to be available. Sometimes your best ability is availability. And I don't think I always make myself available. And then there's times where, I can be extremely charismatic, and the life of the party, for lack of a better term. And it may cause people to develop expectations of me that the introverted side of me is not prepared to obligate at times. Even relationships, I've been in unhealthy relationships of convenience, not really understanding, what my process looks like thoroughly when it comes to meeting the need, the various stages of what that may look like. I found myself as an adult in relationships of convenience. It wasn't that I didn't have an appreciation or an affection for the individuals that I may have been in relationships with, but it didn't. It was always a hindsight perspective that kind of helped me see, where I contributed, what was unhealthy about that contribution, and how I hurt myself, how I might have hurt other people, or just inconvenience. And sometimes it wasn't always about hurting folks. It was about, wasted time. And I guess to some degree that's a form of hurt, but, even for myself. So just being able to acknowledge those things, I'm just now getting to a point in my life where that is a very deliberate process, only because, it hasn't, coming from being formerly incarcerated, reacclimating yourself into society as an adult, especially when the developmental stage of your life was in an environment that was artificial, especially in comparison to, the average development of somebody else, graduate from high school, senior prom, senior boat cruise, those type of things, getting your first legitimate drink, even if you had a drink before, legally at a bar at 21, all those experiences, going from high school to college, or entering adult conversations. You might have been a young thug on the street, went to jail 16 and had sex with an older woman, excuse my language, but it's not the same as having adult conversation, and going through those experiences that kind of help shape you and help you make mature decisions. So, battling with my identity is definitely one of those situations. And not so much that I don't have a sense of myself. I'm lucky to have a sense of purpose, which definitely contributes to my overall sense of self and sense of worth. But just to kind of give that story justice, I'm lucky in with that I have the ability to express these things. But I also am maturing to the point, having the confidence now to where I have to start advocating for other brothers and sisters who suffer and experience some of these things, either growing up. It doesn't even have to do with anything about being incarcerated. It just has to go with, the psychological warfare that young Black men and women of color are engaged in. And I actually can take it a step further. At this stage in the game, it's really about, it really is a class system that has far fewer classes than it used to have. And so, there's poor whites, there's poor, Hispanics. And I think that here in America, we're locked into what I would call like 1950 values, but we far outgrown the functionality of those values. So that's still the image that the rest of the world has, or that we like to portray as this very industrious, progressive nation. And even 1950s, we still talking about the absence of civil rights, but still the industrial notion of America moving into the 60s and the 70s. We were very looked upon as a very strong, industrious, mighty nation. And I think that's been weakened over time, especially by the injustices that has taken place, very recently, obviously going all the way back to, not just Trayvon, but like Oscar Grant and stuff like that. So, just to kind of sum up like who I am, man, sometimes I tell people I'm a reformed thug, you know what I mean? And I guess, I have to be careful who I say that to, because there's certain imagery associated with the idea of the word thug. Sometimes, I look at myself as just, not so much as a prophet. I don't want to say narcissist. Yeah, I don't want to sound too narcissistic, but I do know that I have a calling on my life, and the universe, God. Yep. Go ahead.
You definitely, to me, just from our interactions, you seem to have a full inventory of who you are. And that is a rare trait. That's a rare quality. Most people kind of run from something, and you seem to be running exactly to what your purpose is. But, in keeping it 100 with you, I got to go back, because the decision, I know there were trinkets, there were things that you wanted, you know what I mean? And we all wanted them. I mean, we got some years between us, and we know a lot of the same people, you know what I'm saying? And so, I know when I was coming up in the town, I was disallowed to even step foot into certain situations because of my family. And it was like, that's not the path that we gonna let you go on far. But, as you got older, I mean, that decision to pick up that work. And for those in the audience that don't know what work is, that would be drugs or something illicit or illegal that you do commerce with. Did it ever dawn on you and take notice of the destruction?
Oh, did it? Yeah. Did I ever take knowledge? Oh, yeah, definitely, man. And that's one of the things. Seemed like I grew up in a household where my mother was a student. I want to say a student of the world, where, she just had this ability to retain information and put her best foot forward. So I think part of that had to do with coming from the South, being raised by a mother herself who had a strong notion that it's always important to kind of have your best foot forward. I don't care if you got on your own clothes, your old clothes, them clothes better be clean. I don't care if it's the pants with the hole in the knee, they better be clean. Have something for somebody to offer somebody to drink when they come to your house, just little things like that. And I think growing up as a single parent, my mother, with a single parent household, my mother put an emphasis on survival and teaching me how to survive. And so, to kind of stay in that lane, like it was easy for me to kind of get into the life and make adjustments because I was very cerebral. Like I've always been academically, I always strive for academic excellence. I always appreciated getting good grades and getting that kind of praise. So I think a lot of what was also, I was programmed to be, I was programmed as I believe we all to some degree to receive praise. But I guess I reached a point where I outgrew the praise that would come from, getting the good grades in school or, hitting a double or a home run on the baseball field or something, to where I was maturing a little bit faster psychologically, and I needed those praises that kind of came with my interpretation of the world around me. So I was always, instead of just like thinking about, and I kind of like lost track of the question, so forgive me, but instead of always thinking about like selling dope and stuff initially, I was always trying to think of like slick stuff to do, where I can take something, you know, that I might have got for $2 and then sell it for $10, and just kind of keeping these different channels of hustle open so that I had these multiple revenue streams. I might have got $4, $5 over here, $10 over here. By the end of the day, you know, at the end of the week, I might have bubbled on $500, and it could have been just putting together a bicycle frame, you know what I'm saying, building bikes. And that's kind of how I started. I became resourceful very early. I became, I started looking at what the dope dealers needed and stuff like that before I just jumped in the game. I can remember getting my first quarter ounce, first time I ever bought dope, from one of my homeboys, because I was always selling them something, a bike, I might have came across an old little gun or something like that. And I always knew I always was able to get them things, food, whatever the case may be. But then I started looking at how they was getting the money to pay me. So then I started, I bought, I had a couple of dollars, and I was more than welcome to hang out, in the neighborhood or whatever. So then I started hustling that way. Then I realized a couple of things. When you come to crack, a lot of times people would buy soft, which is like powder form, and then you would have to rock it up. So I can remember listening to just OG like conversations. You hear some of the brothers talk how you can stretch it more if you get it powder. So if I buy it in rock, I'm gonna get, whatever, 7 grams, whatever the case may be. If I bought it in powder, I might get that, but I can still put a little something on it and maybe get a little bit more, stretch it or something, right? So then I learned to cook. And then you realize a lot of brothers don't know how to cook. So then that became like a little hustle that I knew how to cook. You know what I'm saying?
Well, my question was, really, at what point did you realize, or did you even realize, the destruction that was happening?
Yes.
Selling to somebody's auntie, selling to somebody's sister, selling to somebody's mother.
Yeah, definitely. I think I kind of went through this process where I glorified the game first. But because I guess what I was saying, because of the things that my mother had me doing, reading to her very early or whatever, I had a strong sense of, you knew it wasn't right just from the Nancy. I mean, you had a sense of, the criminality of it. I didn't have a sense of the destruction. And I don't think no one did initially, right. You know what I mean? And up until it was being criminalized. But no one, at least from my perspective today, it was being criminalized, but the whole initiation of it was an organized attack on like my community. But like we knew it was, just say no, this was your brain on drugs. We seen all those commercials and stuff like that, but it wasn't really, the destruction didn't come until you really started seeing like your homeboy's mother just gone. You know what I'm saying? And then the killing started happening. And I wanted to say for me, that was like 90, 91, like 91 and then kind of on. It was just like, that's when you really started to see the destruction. Back in the day, I was just like around 11, 12, 13. I was around 14, 15. I was off the chain. So that by that time, I guess I had a sense of the criminality, but no real sense of the destruction, to say the least. Mm-hmm.
Well, you're watching the Conversation.live. I'm your host, James Farr. Joining me today is DKing, and he is one of the most creative people I know. I mean, this brother is on point. So we understand kind of where you came from, and I know where you are right now. And obviously it's not where you start, but it's where you end up. And, it's good to hear, somebody really take the accountability and acknowledge what their transgressions were, but that's not all the story has to offer for you, brother. I mean, you're doing some amazing work. I mean, you ran for city council in your city. You talk about this thing called urban ingenuity. So, let's leave yesterday where it was. You know what I mean? Because God knows if you caught me yesterday, and I say that figuratively, I was a different person than I am today. But when you talk about urban ingenuity, what do you mean by that?
Okay, so yeah, urban ingenuity. For me, it's when your actions match your ambitions. It's about resourcefulness. It's about you taking control of. It's about ownership, first of all, and stakeholdership, and then kind of taking control of your destiny with what you have. What you have in your hand. I think too often people look at everything that's missing and what they need to get started, to have something be as appealing as something that they may appreciate, or something that they may appreciate, at least to the point to where they want to emulate. And so I think that oftentimes people just don't start with what they have. And I think that people get so caught up in the hype that they try to emulate the hype and they don't understand enough about the process. You take a lot of reality TV, you take some of the lyrics in rap music. I think when people hear that, they take that as their cues, both even as a social cue, and even as even as instructions on how to guide themselves through business or whatever the case may be. There's not a knock at Cardi B. You take somebody like Cardi B, you take anybody who is looking up to her as a young woman who may even have a similar life experience to her. For a lot of folks, that's the image or the pinnacle of the steps that are necessary for them to achieve that level of success, especially from like the material perspective and the things that she's been able to do for her family and for herself now. But I think that's a very limited perspective to have, especially in America, in spite of the challenges that we have, even socially.
I mean, when you look at someone like Cardi B, I'm new to it, right? I understand. She's a star on one of the Love and Hip Hop franchises, and obviously she has been making a lot of noise and news, topping Billboard and all this other stuff. But the problem I have with that is there's no balance. If the end goal is, not dancing and making money moves, I understand where she's coming from, and I don't knock her hustle. I get it, right? But I just don't see enough balance. It's not the narrative of the story that I would like to share with my daughter because she can't relate to it. So, I have to battle mainstream media to make sure that my daughter understands that the pathway to role models and examples like her mother or like a Michelle Obama or someone like that. And it just won't correlate. Now, is that bougie? I don't know. It's just not my reality. What I mean?
I don't think it's bougie. I think that hardened people who would embrace the narrative that is, tailored, that is more specific of like Cardi B's audience, has a hard time with understanding the idea of tolerance and appreciation for different perspectives. So sometimes you have very bougie people who, because they can't relate to other perspectives, will knock it. In the case of you, who I don't consider bougie, and you don't knock what Cardi is doing, you just simply highlighting that the ideal experience that you want for you and your family, that is not conducive to your child's development and what you see for her future. So what happens is you have people who will turn Cardi B up loud every time it comes on the radio, who just can't relate to that concept. And so I think that's, if I want to be more specific and just talk about the African American community, I think it's because we don't want to talk about our own dirty laundry is probably the one of those binding cords that keeps us trapped in systems of oppression, because it's not about always an issue. I think we have become, as a community, so locked into morals and dogma that we just completely we are completely we are not mindful of reality. So we get so caught up in morals and dogma, our religion, what our preachers say, the fact that we don't want to look bad, or the fact that we just would rather turn a blind eye to things that are not okay, as to not highlight things that are not okay in our community. So it's just kind of like this combination of things. And I think till we can kind of be willing to air out some of our dirty laundry publicly, we can become empowered again. I think that's the big. So a perfect example is when you talked about me addressing my past head on. What else am I supposed to do? Lay down and die? You know what I mean? Like, if I wake up every day, am I supposed to be trapped under my indiscretions? If I'm a free man with the ability to get up and go to work and do things for myself and try to build a future, I think that people just kind of get trapped over under what they think might destroy their image, and not so much what could actually heal us in a very sustainable way.
You're watching the Conversation.live. I'm your host, James Farr. Joining me today is DKing, and this brother is out there in the streets. He's out there in different circles. And that's kind of the duality. And one of the things that I really admire about you is that you can hit the block and you can hit the boardroom. And it's a necessary skill set and really a talent. You know what I mean? You have to. And I think something about where we were cultivated at, our soil. You say game, right? That's something that for some of us is just real innate. But you talk about community, right, and community service. Like, you ran for city council. Mm-hmm. That's crazy to me. You know what I mean? I don't want to be that public. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. What made you decide to do that, man?
So there's a couple of reasons, but I wanted to shake it up and wake it up. First of all, I'm not a politician. So I seen city council as a platform to try to massage an agenda out of our community, a well-defined agenda. And now when I say the community, so here in the city of Richmond, it's kind of like Richmond, California, is kind of like the last frontier. It's one of those communities in the Bay Area that was Johnny come lately to the regentification process, although it's been taking place for easily 15, I want to say 17 years, easily. And
let me add this right there, because it tripped me out. I was in town, some years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, working on another project, and we were down by the Richmond BART station at the Lord Richmond, the Performing Arts Theater, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the first things I noticed was the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. I saw the new light post. I mean, the most obvious things were the construction that was happening around the BART station, right? But I saw infrastructure, and mm-hmm. I remember what they did in places like Hunters Point, places like Fillmore. The first thing that happens is the infrastructure. And I would tell people, when I come back and visit, man, this place getting ready to get gentrified because it's the last piece of property. It sits right across the water from Marin. There's a new ferry coming into Richmond right now that will be able to shuttle people across the water into San Francisco. And, one of the things that I think is a misnomer is this idea of what gentrification actually is. And I don't want to segue off of your community service, because we'll come back into that. But mm-hmm. neighborhood I moved in, I was a gentrifier, right? Mm-hmm. But when you say gentrifier, we don't typically think about us. But on paper, everything statistically said that my wife and I, dual income, no kids, dink, right? We were gentrifiers. Then I had a family. Now I'm walking up the street with the stroller and all this other stuff. And you know what people told me? Man, why you move over there? That's the hood. This mm-hmm. was this. And I full well knew that there was a 20-year vision plan for that area. Mm-hmm. And so I bought low mm-hmm. at the time. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to segue too far off of that, but when back to you and your community service, brother. Mm-hmm. Running for office.
And there's so many things that you can say about that, like you being in position to be able to buy low. You know, there's so much that can be said about that in an incredible way. But yes, so one of the reasons why I ran again was to, I guess one of the second reasons was to demystify that process. So in the state of California, if you are not on parole and depending on, I believe it's a couple of felonies that might bar you permanently, you can vote. And if you can vote, you can definitely hold public office up until a point, you know. But so part of that was to demystify the process as far as what I believe the community needed as a whole. So you have this gentrifying going on. Gentrification is not a bad thing, because gentrification is not just displacement of residents and housing. It's more than that. We're talking about, you know, businesses. We're talking about increasing, you know, boosting the economy, the local economy. So gentrification is not bad. What makes gentrification bad is when there's not when there's a lack of holistic participation. You see what I'm saying? So that's what kind of makes makes it bad. So when new companies want to come to town, or when there's something taking place in the community that requires community participation and voice, oftentimes the community is disengaged, disinterested, and more often than not, the information is brought to them late and in a way that's not necessarily palatable. You know what I mean? So that's one of the challenges. And so I've seen a lack of stakeholdership, a lack of ownership, a lack of awareness. And I thought that my unique circumstances would kind of help jumpstart that instrument of observation. Like, wait a minute, here's this kid, here's this guy, young brother, with this unique experience, this unique past, with no traditional support. And what I mean by traditional support, the traditional social and civic organizations that existed in the community, certain ones who advocate for policy and other ones who, you know, at some point in time had influence and the ability to kind of help endorse a candidate to get. So none of that traditional support, often struggling with trying to reconcile my very progressive, pragmatic views with deeply seated feuds between what I would say the more conservative. When I say conservative, I'm just saying I'm referencing like an old guard of political players from you know, various perspectives, and then this new emerging entity called the Richmond Progressive Alliance here in the city of Richmond. And so in the last, you know, 15 years, there's been this power struggle. And now you have this very progressive council and this very progressive entity that has a lot of influence over the community today. And so having relationships with them, liking some of the progressive ideas, but being deeply connected culturally and specifically to some of these more conservative organizations and institutions, especially the ones that are Black. So it was like, you know, I'm a young brother who we don't, you know, as far as we can tell, you don't represent any group of people that we need to feel, you know, inspired to support you or endorse you by, because we don't know where your influence or your power really is. And quite frankly, your message is a little bit contradictory or damaging to what my message is. And also you sound like who our arch enemies are. So it was so bad that even when I would go to council meetings and I would use a word like progressive, just the word progressive, to illustrate how progressive we become as a people, as a nation, the fact that we have touchscreen telephones, the fact that we're doing this live cast at the very moment. So it was so bad that for some people just to use the word progressive and the lack of understanding of, say, the context of what you was talking about would create this tension where people see, I told you he was a member of this group or this particular organization. So trying to reconcile that, I had to go at it alone. And quite frankly, for the amount of money that I had, the fact that there was no political leader or anyone who guided me and walked me through the process in terms of what to file, how much fees would cost, you know, banking, reporting, None of that. All that was, self-taught. Again, that's a direct result of that's urban ingenuity at its finest. So not having any mentors, not working under any politicians, not having a political science degree. And, and it's an extraordinary feat in the sense that someone like me is not expected to play at all in that arena. And especially with the people in the community who I identify with the most. I love Richmond. I love what Richmond represents from Point Richmond to Hilltop, but the unique experience that I identify with the most is certainly not expected for someone like me to kind of come out of that environment with these unique experiences and have political aspirations. So, and I'm still on the battlefield because I still believe that it's an excellent platform for me to talk about some of the things that I know most folks don't have the gumption to talk about because of political allegiances, or prior to me talking about it, it wasn't popular. I believe that I played a critical role in introducing the idea, conceptually, the idea of stakeholdership to the community of Richmond, especially with the community that I represent the most, and what that looks like, what that idea is. And I see so many people using that language now to help illustrate, their agenda and their ideas. So
you're tuned in to the conversation.live, and I am your host, James Farr, and I have Brother DKing joining us all the way from Richmond, California. And it's just a beautiful thing, brother, that we're able to, with technology now, we're able to kind of remove mainstream media, if you will, and really talk directly to the people. Folks, some of you may see this on a replay. It'll be available just a few minutes after we finish this live stream. And we want you to share this information. If you're listening and watching from the 510, if you're listening and watching from the 415-707, go ahead and type that area code down in the comment box. Let us know that you're there. My folks that are here where I'm at in the 626, put that in the comments. That way we know you're there. And we'll send you some alerts and let you know the next time that we'll be going up live. And before we get out of here, Brother King, one last thing that I want to cover with you, right? I was last week I had Dr. Melina Abdullah on, who is the lead organizer for Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. And she left me with understanding that our struggle is our struggle, but it's a beautiful struggle, right? And one of the things that I see that happens, and I don't want to, I'm going to go with the crab in the bucket scenario. I'm trying not to even be in that bucket to begin with, but this thing about competition within the struggle, right? He think he that, or he's trying to be this, or, that has just been something that has perplexed me. And I think it's a huge hindrance in us collectively doing something together. I mean, what is it like for you, just on the real?
Oh, definitely, man. I feel it, there's a fine, I wouldn't say there's a fine line, but there's, if you're honest, you have to ask yourself, how much of it is paranoia, if you will, at least for me, or how much of it is, genuine competition. I think that for me, I experience a lot of lack of engagement partly for the fact that it's so important for me to reclaim the narrative. As you know, I being a person who owns a media company, being a person who is an information junkie, who believes that it's important to get information to the people. Partly, I'm not a professional journalist, but I am, I guess I can say I am a professional journalist in the sense that I do own and operate my own media company. So I think I have evolved over time, but I think it's about the information and citing the source. When a person will not acknowledge where they get their information from, that's a form of competition for me. Even in the news, you'll see reporters cite the source of wherever they may have got the information from. For me, that's a big that plays a big role, because what happens is that sometimes, especially with the social media, you can say something so profound and so impactful that leads to a call to action. But for someone who is just regurgitating, that initial engagement without the passion, without the plan, without the instruction, without having a sense of control, growth in some circumstances, you are regurgitating something that might feel good, that might emotionalize people, but then it lacks context. And so it dies once it reaches, once it kind of plays out. But when it's like, for example, Tupac had a whole idea associated with the term thug life, but he also had the struggle to tear through a person's initial perception of what the idea of thug and life meant. But it was a whole plan to inspire a particular group, a subset of society who were marginalized and disenfranchised, and empower them to take healthy action to change their circumstances. And so when you live in that kind of a mission and you're doing it very independently, it is very damaging to the struggle, to any movement, when you are a part of a community that is in need, and that we highlight what those needs are, who are making moves in those communities, but we don't also highlight the success stories. So, for example, you take somebody like me who's part of the reentry population. I'm not saying everybody should be talking about me, but if, for example, when you hear to talk, at least in my community right now, about restorative justice, when you hear to talk about reincarceration and reentry, when you hear talk about politics and stuff like that, or people changing their lives from community or getting out of prison or whatever, this is not a competition, but I would think that I would be someone that people would reach out to for information, or at least highlighting as an example of what transformative, sustainable change could look like, and ask, and get that information about what I'm doing and what steps that I've taken to actually get there. And the reason why this is so important, and I know you might have to go, brother, the reason why this is so important is because without the examples, at some point, you are going to leave in your wake a legion of disappointed people who will then turn on you in the midnight hour when you least expect it. If you can't show them the completed project at the other end. You tell a person, hey, you go through this system and on the other end, you go come out shiny, but you don't have nobody shiny. You don't have no pictures of somebody dirty going in before and coming out shiny before. After you send enough people through that pipeline, right? And you might be able to bless one or two as your props. But if after you send so many people through that unique pipeline and they come out the other end dissatisfied and disenfranchised, and disconnected even more to their own, at least having a solution-minded perspective, you playing with fire. And it is so critical. It is so critical that, at least from here in Richmond, and if I had to say a word specifically to the African American community, it is so critical that you have to take your focus off the agenda of others long enough to have a well-defined agenda of your own. If your agenda is simply to block the agenda of someone else, or to highlight the flaws or how someone else's agenda can make you further disenfranchised, you're missing the point. You're missing the point. You're not looking at why it is you can't capitalize on whatever opportunities are there. I don't care what they are. And I'm kind of referencing the conversation I recently had about the marijuana industry, whatever, but I don't care. It could be a Jamba Juice. It can be a barbershop, whatever. We have to start looking at why we're not in a position to capitalize on those things as a whole. And that's one of the reasons why I think that competition is healthy, because it does inspire people. But at the same time, as far as the struggle is concerned, people just don't want to acknowledge the truth because they get theirs off the top sometimes. Well, so
we're going to park that right there and let it sit, let it marinate with some folks. How can people get in touch with you, man? Tell website, social media. Go ahead and get that out, and then I'll make sure I put that down in the comments as well, so people can know how to reach you.
Man, thank you so much, man. So so you can reach me at DKing. That's all on all the social networking sites. I'm talking about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, SoundCloud. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel at DKing. That's capital D, capital DEMOND, capital KING. Also, I'm the president and I'm founder of Redeem World Multimedia. We're a media agency, and one of our first assets is Redeemed World Magazine. Again, that's Redeemed World Magazine. Log on to redeemedworld.org. That's www.redeemedworld.org. It's news, views, and information from an urban progressive perspective. There you can listen to my podcast, Redeeming the Time podcast. Again, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at DKing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Man, brother, I appreciate you joining us this afternoon and taking the time out of your schedule, brother. And again, my name is James Farr. You are tuned in watching The Conversation Live. We are powered by Pasadena Now. Go ahead and check them out. Check out our brother DKing and all the great work that he's doing. And until we see you on the next live stream, as always, agape.